Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, How to Avoid the Biggest Mistakes Buyers Make Abroad. I'm Abbie Young, I'm a Digital Channel Manager here at Your Overseas Home, and once again I am joined by my colleague Julian. Julian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I've been researching the most common pitfalls that buyers face across Europe, and today we'll help you avoid the costly mistakes that you could make.
So this is the fifth session in our How to Buy a Property Overseas series. Last time we covered the legalities of buying abroad. If you missed that session, you can head to the on-demand section of our website and catch up there. But today we're focusing on the real mistakes that buyers often make and how you can steer clear of them. So let's first maybe kind of get used to the platform. Some of you I think will have been here before, and we'll kind of give you a bit of a run through of who we are here at Your Overseas Home. But first, if everyone wants to head to the questions tab and just let us know maybe where you're looking to buy a property, which area if you already know, which country if you're not sure yet, and we can kind of get a feel for where everyone is looking to purchase. If you haven't kind of joined us before here, we are obviously Your Overseas Home, and we're here to help you make buying a home overseas as simple and stress-free as possible. We host webinars. We also have an upcoming virtual event, which we'll give you a bit more information on towards the end of this. And we also have consultants who you can speak to on the phone. If you do have any questions, we'll be the people to kind of come to help you out with all of your plans. But let's get into, pitfalls and what to kind of avoid. So there are kind of some general pitfalls across every single country, mistakes that are quite easy to make. The first ones are fairly obvious. It's things like not seeking independent legal advice or overlooking hidden costs, which we've done an entire session on the hidden costs you might not be aware of. So making sure you know about legal fees and notary fees, but also thinking about things that you might need to do to the property. So things like renovations, and maybe you don't like the kitchen or you wanted a pool and there isn't one yet. So having to kind of think about what those things could cost you too. But also things like believing in verbal promises from developers or sellers. If it's not written down, it's not a guarantee. So don't just take that for their word. And also things like not planning ahead for your inheritance, succession, and then also things like visas and residency rules. You need to make sure kind of what you need to keep an eye out for. So yeah, those are kind of the common ones across all countries to be aware of.
Yeah, and so one of the things you need to sort of bear in mind when you're buying overseas, on the one hand, you are buying a property like you can at home, but there is the added complication of you're potentially going to be dealing in other languages, you're going to be having to sort of work maybe in different time zones, these sorts of things. Those is just sort of an added layer of complications that could bring a couple of mistakes. But the thing which you really need to be aware of is that some countries do have very specific things which are different to where you're buying at home. I mean, for instance, in some countries, debts can remain attached to a property, not to the seller. So you might end up buying something without realizing that you're actually buying into sort of a debt that was already accrued by the previous owner. This is something we're going to be going into today, but it's just sort of worth flagging early on.
Yeah, definitely. Now we'll go into all of the pitfalls country to country and give you ideas of the things you need to be aware of. I think like as a caveat, this is not supposed to be a scary webinar about, the horror stories of everything that can go wrong. It's about the things you need to be aware of to make sure that you don't fall foul of mistakes that are actually really easy to make. And just to be kind of aware of, some of the things that can happen. But this is certainly not to kind of scare you away from it. If you've got the right help and the right people by your side, you probably won't fall into any of these, these mistakes. So in Spain, what we normally see in terms of kind of tripping people up, it's things like paying deposits and you've not checked the building legalities. Buying rustic land without permits is a big one. So you need to make sure that, if you are buying rustic land in particular, it's got the right permit and it could be sold really cheap. That doesn't necessarily, that it's probably worth just doing some extra checks, especially if it's, quite quite a good price. And then I think one of the big ones is you want to make sure that you are being very sensible if you're buying an off-plan property in particular. Your Overseas Home was actually founded off the back of some errors made years ago. We're talking kind of, I think, 2004 here, when purchasing an off-plan property in Spain. And unfortunately, the founders of Your Overseas Home, their parents-in-law, tried to purchase an off-plan property, and they didn't get bank guarantees. Their funds were used to kind of purchase, to kind of, build the property itself. And that then caused them lots of problems, which eventually meant it all fell through. And it wasn't a very pleasant experience, which is why Your Overseas Home was started, so that we could, provide people with education on these things, especially back in the early 2000s when that wasn't kind of common knowledge. So one of the big things is, if you are trying to purchase an off-plan property, make sure that your money is being held in a separate account. So the deposit you pay to hold the property should be in a separate account that's not used to fund the building of the property. That's a really important one. And it's very rare that developers won't be using that. It's normally called a segura. So you can check with them that way to confirm that that's where they're putting your funds. Very similar to like an escrow. But that's a kind of a big one where you can fall foul, and you just want to make sure that the developer that you might be buying through, or the agent that you're buying through, has your best interest in heart. So that's just a big one that I always like to kind of highlight for everybody.
Another thing to bear in mind really as well is that, particularly when buying in Spain, but we'll find this with a couple of the different countries we're talking about today, that there can be these additional fees that you're not necessarily expecting. So when you're putting together your budget of what you're wanting to buy overseas, you've got to make sure that you're accounting for that extra money as well. So in the case of Spain, do make sure that you've got money set aside for those taxes and notary fees that you wouldn't normally expect to pay if you're a UK buyer, for instance. And it's just so that you're not sort of in the last steps and stages of completing on a property when you suddenly realise that you need to pull together a few extra €1,000. It's just something which you need to be aware of. You set budget to scale to what you can afford. This is something we've actually covered in a previous webinar, and so do look back through the feed on YouTube or on the Overseas Home website on the on-demand section. We go into detail about what each country is going to be demanding of you when it comes to these additional fees.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great piece of advice. And I think, like we said, a lot of this, and we say this kind of in every webinar, a lot of the tips that we'll give are relevant to each country. And you'll hear some repetition here, and some of the things do crop up every time. But kind of the same in Portugal. We've sort of already mentioned this, but debts will transfer usually with the property. So unpaid taxes, unpaid utility bills. If you purchase a home that has those debts attached to it, you will become legally responsible. So just make sure all of your checks are in place. You know everything there is to know about the property. Get an independent lawyer who's not just trying to kind of push the sale through for you. Sometimes most estate agents are good people, but they're ultimately, it's in their benefit to sell the property. Whereas a lawyer, an independent lawyer is working exclusively on your behalf. So they'll be able to make sure that if there are any issues, you're completely aware of them. It's also things that are kind of quite simple, like you need to make sure that you have a proper NIF tax number. So that's kind of like your national insurance number before you sign any contracts. So get that sorted ahead of time. And oftentimes a lawyer will be able to help you with that paperwork. They can do things like sign power of attorney, get that sorted for you in case you can't come to Portugal particularly often. They can do that. And that just means the whole process will go by very smoothly and there won't be any kind of delays. And you do need an NIF to be able to purchase. But also be really cautious if you are looking to purchase a property and you have plans to rent it out. Be very careful in Lisbon, Porto, and the Algarve in particular. There are really, really strict rules around short-term rentals in particular. Things like Airbnb are very, very strict. If you have a vision that you're going to buy this property and make, thousands and thousands of pounds every month, make sure that if that's how you're kind of intending to maybe pay up for a mortgage or things like that, that's actually feasible, speak again to an independent lawyer. They'll be able to confirm the exact legalities for the region, town, even that you're buying in, and make sure that all of that is kind of, the T's are crossed, the I's are dotted, and you're fine to rent that property out.
Something else you need to be aware of as well is, and this is going to be true again of a lot of properties that you're looking at, but make sure that you have a survey done. You've got to check if there's any of these additional works like pools or balconies or terraces, they haven't been done without the proper authority. This is one of those problems where if it's highlighted, if it's discovered after you've purchased and it's highlighted by a neighbour or at the point that you're trying to sell on to someone else, you are going to be responsible for those additional works. And so that might mean that you have to tear a terrace down, refill a pool, take down an extension, all of these sorts of things where it's like, if you can just do the thorough check when you're in the buying process, then it's not going to be something which bites you later in the time of your ownership.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you'll all see the common theme here is do as much research on the property you want to buy as possible, and make sure you're speaking to independent contacts about that, just to make sure that everything is above board. I think kind of especially in Greece, that also definitely is fairly important as well. So it's things like, we have gone into more detail on this when we spoke about which region to buy in an earlier webinar, that again, I feel like we're really shouting out our earlier webinars today, but we have already spoken about things like restricted border zones. So in some regions, if you are an international buyer, you won't necessarily be able to purchase a property there. So just be really careful. Don't kind of go on a viewing trip or a recce out to an area, fall in love, potentially even find a property and then discover you can't buy there. Do your research ahead of time. I think we've already got our webinar on it. Pretty sure we have an article on it as well that details all of that for you too. It's just very important to make sure you don't want to fall in love with somewhere you sadly won't be able to live in. Also, Greece can have some delays. I would say delays are potentially they're pretty common in Greece, in particular. And in particular, at the moment, they are modernising their land registry. And so you just need to be aware that there may be some delays. And so sometimes your title registration can take years. So just, again, do your research, make sure all is fine. And if you can, if you have the time to spare, great. If you can be delayed and there's a perfect property for you. But just kind of be aware that that could be something that that holds you back. But also things, for instance, like making sure all your documents are in place. Oftentimes, one of the things that you could make a mistake with is kind of signing a contract without a power of attorney. So if you're not present, you do need to have handed over power of attorney to an independent lawyer so that they can sign it on your behalf. And you usually need to be in Greece to sign it, or have a representation for you in Greece to sign it, for it to kind of have legally gone through. So that's just one thing to kind of be aware of. Don't kind of just sign something. It's not kind of like an e-signature that you can just do. Usually you often will need to be at the notary's office, or your lawyer will need to be there for you. So just something to kind of flag that you'll need to be there.
I mean, so actually, one of the other things we're going to be talking about here is renovation risks, similar to Portugal, similar to some of the other countries coming up. One aspect of Greece, which is actually really good as a buyer, is that it is on the seller that they need to produce a survey, a technical document, essentially, of like how sound the property is that they're selling. But the reason why we've still got renovation risks on here is because you can't ignore that document. It's going to be written in Greek. It's going to be technical. You need to go and get someone to actually go and read through it and essentially work out if what you're buying is a really charming rustic property, or it's one which has quite a few issues which are hidden. Also, there's nothing to say, and we would recommend get your own survey as well. It's brilliant to be able to arrive at a property with a piece of documentation which is already telling you some of the risks or additional costs you're going to be accruing when buying a property. But there's nothing to say that you can't get your own survey done, which will also mean that you can really, really trust the work of the person, and that you've paid for someone who's then working for you. as Abbie's already said, and as we will say again, before you buy a property is basically the best time to do all this research. It's your way of avoiding, well, common pitfalls. So do make sure you do that.
It's almost like we titled it perfectly. Yeah, I mean, I think that the Cyprus ones are perhaps some of the ones that are also slightly repetitive as well, but also there is a slight difference now that we'll get into in Cyprus, which is that one of the things we just often highlight, a lot of people will consider purchasing, you know, sometimes in Paphos, but some people will also be interested in Northern Cyprus. We wouldn't necessarily, you know, we're not going to make any comments kind of on that, but if that's somewhere you're considering, we won't be able to help you with that, sadly. But just be aware of some of the risks you could be entering into if you are planning to buy in the north. It's a disputed territory, so just be aware of that. Do your research and make sure it's something you're comfortable getting into. I think Cyprus as a whole is just one of those things where doing your research is really important. It's, for instance, there's things like title deed problems that can come up. So there have been issues in the past with kind of a backlog on title deeds with Cypriot properties, and sometimes the developers haven't quite split them out properly, and so you just kind of need to be aware of that. Oftentimes when you are looking for a property in Cyprus as well, you'll see on property portals like our own, it will often highlight and say with title deeds in the description, which I know can throw some people off, and they're not always aware of what those are. Effectively, without a title deed, you can't legally transfer ownership. A lot of people will buy a property that doesn't have title deeds and we'll just sort them out afterwards, but it's just something to, again, do your research on, chat to a lawyer about, make sure that, you know, you feel kind of comfortable with that. But oftentimes, yeah, estate agents will flag to you that the property has title deeds, and that way you know that the ownership is legally transferred and it's kind of all good to go. But like I said, there's a bit of a backlog, so some of them it might be that the title deeds are in process and being done. So that's just kind of something to be aware of, and a pitfall that some people can fall into if they're just not aware of that situation. And also just forgetting to register your purchase contract at the land registry. You need to do it within 2 months, and it just protects your rights. So just something to make sure that you've done, you know, once you've purchased a home. It's not kind of, you know, sit back and enjoy. There are a couple extra steps that you just need to do just so that you can then sit back and enjoy.
Then also, and so this is a particularly large problem, not in terms of it being very common, it's just also that it's quite a severe problem if it was to crop up, which is if you're buying a new build property and you've not got a contract which is protecting you, if the developer has debts and they go bust, then it might be that your property would be part of the bankruptcy agreement. And so essentially, even if you've bought a property in full, it's still maybe tied to the outcome and livelihood of that company. This isn't an unavoidable problem. You basically just need to have a solicitor who is going through that contract with you at the purchase point. You need a Cypriot-speaking, a Cypriot solicitor who's able to read through that contract, be absolutely sure that there's no terms which are really working against you. I mean, really looking at all of the pitfalls that we've got up here, when you've got a property in Cyprus you wanted to buy, the expert you most want in your corner is a solicitor. They will be able to help you when it comes to the contract registration. They'll be able to help you when you're buying a new build property to make sure that you're protected. They'll be able to help you with title deeds. This is something which will very much help you with as well. Like, do be in touch if you are looking to buy in Cyprus, because we work with loads of partners in the country. We can set you up with people who can speak English, speak Cypriot, well, Greek, and be able to help you along on every step of this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, there is such a common thread here, which is make sure everything is on paper, and make sure you know what that paper says. You know, don't just sign something in a language you're not familiar with, or even if you can speak the language. You know, we've spoken to people who speak, you know, Greek fluently, who wouldn't sign a legal contract for a property in Greece or Cyprus, because you don't always know what those legal phrases are. You know, it's hard enough in the UK, I think, when you receive a contract in English to know exactly what it means. So especially when you're buying in another country and where you don't necessarily understand all of the legal practices, it's always worthwhile having someone on your side who can check out everything for you. So moving on to France, I would say France is one of those ones that has, I guess, slightly more unusual ones that we haven't really heard as much. Especially in France, don't assume that the notaire you'll be assigned is your lawyer. They're not. A notaire is a completely neutral party who is simply there effectively to carry out the paperwork and to make the sale possible effectively. They work for neither the buyer nor the seller and are appointed to you effectively by the state. And also, at any stage of purchasing property in France, no matter kind of what age you are or what position in life you are in, don't ignore the forced heirship inheritance laws if that's something that you think could be a concern for you. So children may automatically inherit your property and they can actually override UK wills. So just make sure you're aware of that when you get into buying a home. Whatever position you're in right now, have a think about what your future could look like and if that's something that might impact you if you have specific plans for the property, you know, in the future. And also, as we've kind of said in a few of our webinars now, especially when you're buying in France, make sure to budget for potential higher purchase costs. Lawyers in France, can be a little bit more expensive sometimes. So it's worthwhile definitely making sure that you have that kind of 10 to 12% set aside so that you can pay for a notaire, also a lawyer, and any kind of extra fees and taxes that might come up. So just make sure you've got an extra cushion of about 10 to 15%, I would say, of your property price just to cover for you for anything like that.
Again, one of the differences with France, it's more of a cultural difference rather than it is sort of a legal difference. They don't tend to get surveys on properties, and so you won't necessarily have at any point when you're going through a purchase process of someone say, you've not got a survey on this property yet, or we can't move forwards because you've not got a survey yet. But you can absolutely get a survey on the properties. It's just something which you'll need to organise yourself. And it's something which most estate agents you're dealing with will be aware of, especially if you're an international buyer, that they'll be aware that you're probably going to want to seek out a survey, and it's not going to put you in bad stead with the seller at all. Also, I mean, again, if you're looking at a rural property, one aspect that you do want to get checked is whether the septic tank is properly up to code. Not necessarily the nicest of issues to be digging into when it comes to buying property overseas, but it's just sort of thing where it's sort of, particularly in France, most rural properties will have one. Or should have one, but it may be that it's not being maintained properly. It may be that it's not had the proper regulations, and it's just it's not something you really want to get very involved with at the point you're buying a property. So just get it checked out on the searches stage.
Yeah, definitely. And same with like outbuildings, farmhouses, if they haven't had planning permission. We know lots of people who want to buy in France want to have a gîte at the bottom of the garden, and just make sure that if you are seeing a property that has an outbuilding, things like that, firstly that it has planning permissions and is allowed to be there, and also secondly that if you do have any intention of renovating it into a business or anything like that, talk to a lawyer first, make sure that's even feasible. Sometimes you cannot turn some of those buildings into kind of an Airbnb situation. So have a chat with a lawyer first if that's an intention of yours. It also can change the visa that you might be intending to go on depending on how much you intend to make off of that. So just again, have a chat with someone. We've got lots of contacts about who can help with that kind of a thing. So always just worth being careful on. And then finally for this session, buying in Italy and the potential pitfalls. These are all fairly similar to things we've already spoken about. So it's things like not checking if any balconies or extensions were licensed. So make sure that you do that. Especially in Italy, people will have balconies, terraces, all kinds of extensions added on that aren't necessarily legal. So just make sure that you don't fall foul of that. And if they're not approved, there is a chance that you would have to get those demolished, which ideally we would prefer that not to happen. You know, you don't want to have to buy a home and then immediately have kind of mass work done on it, especially if it didn't need it. And the same, I think a lot of people go into Italy hoping to purchase a home for, in particular, very cheap. We've all seen the TV shows, you know, the €1 homes in Sicily and those kinds of things. We've all seen them being turned into these amazing, you know, beautiful homes. And oftentimes renovation costs are not as cheap as you expect. And if a home in Italy is a very, very low value, there is oftentimes a reason for it. And it probably will need gutting and rebuilding. And so don't underestimate how much that might end up costing you. You know, that it's certainly not going to be a small fee. And try and get someone who can figure out for you. You know, your lawyers will be able to help you. Same with your estate agents. They'll be able to give you a rough idea of how much it would cost to fully renovate a property like that. And they'll be able to let you know whether it's worth purchasing the renovation for really cheap and doing all the work yourself, or worth buying something that's already in a better condition. So just have a think about that when you're figuring out how you want to spend your budget. Renovation costs can be very expensive. And also I've heard it can be hard to find people who will do the renovation. You know, sometimes it's kind of hard to find the right people that will do exactly what you want, and it can just be a little bit tricky. So just kind of be aware of that and make sure that, you know, you're not getting yourself into something where you're going to regret it in the future. And also, again, as we've already mentioned, sometimes it can be that outstanding bills and taxes are attached to the property, and therefore if you buy a property where the seller has debt, that debt will then be transferred over to you on that property. So just be aware of that so you don't have any surprises.
Yeah, and very much just to sort of echo what Abbie's been saying, like the best protection you can have when buying a property in any country, but in Italy, where there just is a tradition of essentially adapting your home to make it into the thing that you want to live in currently, but not necessarily doing it up to code. Get a survey. There'll be a lot of people who may be discouraging you getting a survey in the process. You might be hearing from the seller that they're frustrated because you've got a survey happening, this thing. Just ignore that. Get the survey. You'll find out exactly how much work needs to be done. It may be something you're entirely comfortable with, but it's just much better going into buying a property and having your eyes open, because you don't want to sort of find yourself in a position, exactly as Abbie was saying, demolishing things which were features you wanted when you bought the house. You don't want to be spending money making them up to code just so you can enjoy them. And certainly you don't want to find you're in the position where it's like, you bought this beautiful rural home, and actually now you've got to get builders out to that home, and that's going to be an added expense because there's no one local who can do the work you need up to the standard you require. So get the survey. You'll be able to find out all of these problems ahead of time, and you can work out what you're comfortable with.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think especially in Italy, a lot of people want that rural dream. And if you do have to have work done, chances are you're going to want the workmen, or at least one of them, to speak English with you so that you definitely know what work they're doing. You know, I mean, I just had some lighting done in my flat, and I barely understood what they were talking about, and they were talking to me in English. So, you know, imagine trying to get a pool put in, and you know, you don't speak Italian, they don't speak English, you're going to have a difficult time. So the pool of people who will be able to do that work for you will be limited by the fact you might be in a rural area, and then even more limited if you do really feel that you'd be more comfortable having someone English speaking. So just something to be aware of. I know the renovation dream is one that lots of people want to go down, but just be aware that it could be a lot more work than you might be expecting, and perhaps a bit more costly than you might be expecting. So let's kind of just quickly recap before we move on to one of our more general pitfalls. If you are someone who is in between countries and not particularly sure, perhaps you know you want a renovation project, then maybe Italy might not be the right place for you, for instance. So as a kind of very brief recap, in Spain, the things to be aware of are your illegal bills, buying rustic land, and any missing bank guarantees, especially if you're buying an off-plan property. In Portugal, you want to think about debts with the property, unregistered works, and the rental rules if you do plan on doing any kind of Airbnb or short-term rentals, and even long-term rentals too. In Greece, be aware of things like your border zones, delays on the registry, and also, again, risky renovations. In Cyprus, keep an eye out for how comfortable you feel with purchasing in the Northern Territory, if that's somewhere you have been considering, and then things like missing title deeds and debts on the developer. In France, it's inheritance laws, rural property tax, and potential higher costing on the fee side of things. And then in Italy, as we've just covered, it's things like your unlicensed work, potential renovation surprises, and again, those unpaid bills that could be pushed onto you. So that is a very, very brief run through of everything we've discussed so far. So if you're in between countries, those are the things that you should consider and be aware of when you kind of start doing your research into which one is best for you. And if you're already decided, then you kind of know what to look out for now. Okay, very briefly, we've discussed this in many of our webinars so far, so we won't spend too long on this so as not to be repetitive for the people who've already tuned into these before. But one of the biggest pitfalls that most people leave until it's a little bit too late is your currency exchange fluctuations and how much that can actually add on to your property budget.
Yeah, and so basically, as you'll see if you ever look at sort of currency exchange rates, they're forever changing. They are moved around by, yes, politics, yes, trade news, these sorts of things, also just by the whim and will of the markets. This can cause real problems when you're trying to buy overseas. I mean, for instance, if you're saying, let's say you're trying to transfer £500,000, in the last 12 months, you could have seen the value of that money shift by almost £40,000. So, for instance, if you were buying a property in France, which was €500,000, the euro has been gaining in value through this year against the pound. You would now find that to buy that same property, you need to stump up a significant amount more money to make that purchase go through. If you've got the money on hand, that's just a more expensive house for you. If you don't have the money on hand, that might mean you have to pull out of the purchase entirely. You might end up losing your deposit. It's just one of those things where you can't do anything really to control exchange rates. They're always going to change. So you just have to find ways to protect your budget. One of these ways is using a forward contract, which Abbie can explain a bit now.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the interesting things to potentially point out actually is the last time we did this slide was actually back in June, and I went back and looked, and in June of this year, you would have lost out about €35,000 by not using a forward contract. And then we're now in August and we're already up to €37,000, and that's just with 2 months difference. And obviously we're talking about a large budget here of 500,000, but whatever you're spending, this is adding a huge extra percentage on top. It's not far off your 10% mark, so it's certainly something to be aware of. And this is not unusual movement. I think that should be kind of made quite clear here. Usually on average, we will see about a 10% shift in the currency market across a 12-month period. That's very normal. And so the ways that you can mitigate this and to kind of make sure that you're not falling foul of having to spend potentially £40,000 in this scenario is by using a currency exchange specialist. So currency exchange specialists have a variety of products available depending on your appetite for risk, but one of the more popular ones is a forward contract. Effectively what this allows you to do is, let's say tomorrow you go out, you're in Spain, let's say, and you find the perfect property. It's exactly what you wanted. None of these pitfalls are there, and you definitely know you have to have it. What you can do is you can actually lock in the exchange rate right now. That means that no matter how long it takes to complete, whether there's delays in the paperwork or anything like that, you can pay your deposit, lock in the exchange rate, and that means if it's £500,000 today, it's £500,000. for as long as you want to lock the rate in. Some people will lock it in for a year, and some people will lock in for 3 months. You can extend it if necessary, and it effectively just protects you from any risky movements in the market. So, you know, if the pound drops massively, you're protected, and your overseas purchase won't suddenly cost you a huge amount extra. So that's just one of those things we always like to flag. We do work with a currency exchange partner, Smart Currency Exchange, as I mentioned. And they actually just had a webinar, I think about an hour ago now. So if you want to know a little bit more about how you can mitigate this risk, you can head over to the on-demand section. It will be live already, and you can hear from Danny Cook, who's one of the account managers there, who talks through this in a lot more detail. But it's just one of those things that's so avoidable. So be kind of aware of that. Okay, we'll very quickly speed through this because I'm aware we're a little bit over time already, and we definitely want to answer some of these questions. As we've said, all of these mistakes are completely avoidable. So it's very simple. Always use an independent lawyer. Get everything in writing. A verbal promise doesn't mean anything. It needs to be written down. Factor in your hidden costs, so that's your 10 to 15%. Consider, if not get, a professional property survey just to be on the safe side. Plan ahead for things like inheritance when that might come around, visas and taxes, and then naturally work with a currency specialist to cover that side of things.
Yeah, and I think the thing which I hope has come across as well from everything we spoke about today is like, there are some differences when you're buying overseas. There's some aspects of it which is the same, but you're just dealing with the fact that you're buying in another language, in another country. You can't turn up to the property and inspect it yourself as easily. Take your time. It's the easiest thing to do, where you can just sort of like slow the process down until you're satisfied that what you're buying is something you're confident that you want to own. If documents are taking a long time to come through, don't rush. Just wait for them to come through. I mean, you can hurry your solicitor along and these sorts of things, but like, don't sign up to something or agree to something which you're not comfortable with just because you're worried that it's taking too long. If you slow down, you can look out for those pitfalls, you can avoid them. Also, speak to experts. Like, just sort of, you've got many people available to you who can answer your questions. We can put you in touch with lots and lots of them. It's just a case of work out what you're uncomfortable with, what you feel like you don't know enough about, and then you can take the time, learn about it, and you will be able to act with confidence.
Yeah, and thankfully, all of you watching, this is one of our very generic webinars. We're giving you guys the basic overview of things you need to be aware of. We run regular webinars. We've had 3 today on very specific topics, things like, you know, wealth management, inheritance, all of those kinds of things we cover in webinar form. We can book you in with one-on-one consultations with experts who are out there in the country you're hoping to buy in. You're never on your own doing this. There is no question too small or too big. We can, you know, we can make sure that if you have any concerns, you've got the support there to help out. Speaking of questions, we do have a few in here. I just very quickly, Julian, just want to quickly address Keith, who asked if we had any comments specifically on Ireland. We haven't covered Ireland in this one, clearly, but we do have an Ireland buying guide. And if you give us a call, we can drop our number. It's on the screen actually. If you call in that number and ask for one of our consultants, they'll be able to talk you through some of the things to be aware of in Ireland, understand a little bit more about your specific situation. The reality is buying in Ireland kind of depends a little bit whereabouts in the world you're based. So if you're, you know, coming from the US, it'll be a little bit different if you're coming from the UK. So just be aware of that. But we'd definitely be happy to help out and give you kind of more of a one-on-one conversation about that in particular. So hopefully that's helpful.
I'm just picking out another question here as well. Martin, you're saying that you've heard horror stories of people buying a property brand new and then having to deal with the fact there was no planning permission when the property is built and it gets demolished. I don't know specifically about entire properties, but the thing which, as we've been talking about here, where it's sort of renovation work, extension work, I absolutely can believe it would extend to a full property as well.
Yeah.
The best protection here is you get a survey, you get your solicitors. They will do the searches that are required to make sure that the property you're buying is legal. They're also the ones who are going to make sure that you've got a contract which is protecting you from those sorts of fallouts from mistakes which are made. So it's just that thing of like, get the paperwork done. Make sure that you're not buying anything where you've not got sort of any guarantees that that property is allowed to exist there. And yeah, that is something which you can absolutely do by talking to a solicitor.
Definitely. And also kind of even on top of that, if you're buying directly through a developer, most estate agents who are good will not work with developers who are not properly licensed and don't have planning permission for their builds. That would obviously be huge reputational damage for them. So most estate agents, who are obviously often small independent agencies, refuse to work with anybody who doesn't have all of the paperwork. However, if you have connected directly with a developer, do your research, read reviews, ask estate agents. You do not necessarily need to, oftentimes most of these estate agents will be selling all of the good developments. They'll all be listing it. So you can work with an estate agent to buy a development. You don't have to go straight to the developer, but ask in Facebook group chats if anyone's heard of them. If you can't find a paper trail for them, ask around, ask estate agents, ask your lawyers. Most people in Spain in particular, if I'm going to guess you're talking about Spain here, but we actually don't know, but I'm going to presume here, but most of them have a huge network. And if there are any horror stories, they will have traveled around said network. So you would probably be able to just mention their name and someone would flag that there's an issue to you. So yeah, not only will word of mouth help you, but also, like Julian said, a lawyer is always going to be able to get to the bottom of any kind of grey areas you might be feeling. So yeah, hopefully that suits you.
Actually, so Jim's also asked about if you would ever want an unregistered renovation to be kept. And so it's a complicated one. So essentially, if you're looking to buy a property where there is a renovation which isn't on its plans and you're wanting that renovation to be kept, you have to know, and you will talk to your solicitor about this, that you are going to be fully liable for anything that then happens as a result of that. So that could mean as much as a neighbour points it out and reports it, and you have to demolish it, and that's on your own cost, and that you will have to do it because you'll be going against local laws if you leave it. The other is that if it's been done unsafely, and you knew going into the purchase of the property that this was an unlicensed renovation, and there is something that happens that causes anyone to receive harm, you are certainly going to be liable to any of the civil cases that could come as a result of that. So I wouldn't advise it. Talk to your solicitor though, and you'll find out exactly what you're going to be liable for. You wouldn't be the first person in the world who's bought something which wasn't on planning permission, and they either had future plans of getting added to planning permission or to work around it. But just be fully aware going in exactly what it is that you'd be responsible for if something went wrong.
Yeah, definitely. Now picking out here Sharon's question, she says that we've mentioned that 10 to 15% for legal and notaire fees, but what other fees other than moving should be accounted for? I'll give a brief summary, but as we've mentioned, we have done a slightly more detailed webinar on this exact topic. The main thing is kind of like local property taxes, and also just there are oftentimes general fees that will come up. You may need to pay for extra things like your surveys, especially if you're buying a rural property. Lots of things can kind of crop up. Your main one is going to be kind of tax. You'll probably have to pay some kind of tax that is similar to like a stamp duty. So it's kind of things like that that can come up. But we've done a much more detailed session on that. But yeah, it's always having that cushion, and it might not necessarily be that much money, but it's worthwhile having it set aside because you never know what could crop up when you're buying a home. So just something to be aware of.
Just an addendum to what I was saying to Jim's question, just that's on my mind. that's very much a property you'd want to get a survey for, not only because they would tell you whether it was an unlicensed or licensed renovation, and you are saying it's currently unlicensed. A survey will be able to tell you to what standard it's been built, because again, if it's unlicensed, you have no idea if this thing is safe. And it's just a thing where it's like, basically, I think I'm getting a bit worried about the property you're buying, and just talk to a solicitor, talk to a surveyor, and make sure that you don't do anything you regret.
Yeah.
The
We always err
to
on
move
the
on
side of caution. I think that's all.
to move on to I was going to say a lighter question, but so Deirdre's asking if you're going for a French property, it's listed, it's got multiple gîtes, but it's currently only being rented to friends and family. Should you be concerned? There's no need to be concerned, really. Talk to a solicitor. They'll be able to tell you exactly what it is that is legally able to be done with those gîtes. Like it's obviously you don't necessarily want to get so far down the line with a property that's not going to ever be able to have the gîtes that you're wanting to rent out yourself, in terms of spending on those solicitor fees and so on. If you can get the answer by going talking to a Marie, that's the sort of local council group, they'll be able to give you some information about what sort of rental rules are in place for the community. But if you really like the property, you think that it might be that those are legal gîtes, then at the point that you are prior to exchange, going through the processes, just speak to your solicitor, make sure that they've done the checks necessary for those gîtes, so that you know whether that's something which you'll be able to rent out to the public on Airbnb or through other services.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to me, that kind of says there's probably some fairly strict rental rules in the area that you're looking at, or certainly for that property, that's what that would suggest to me. So it just depends if for you being able to rent out those gîtes on short-term rental sites, Airbnb, booking.com, if that is what you're planning to do with the property and you intend to have, a passive income coming from that, if that's a deal breaker, the estate agent will probably be able to tell you why it's only being rented out to friends and family. So always just ask that question. It's not suspicious. It probably just means there's some rules and regulations in place that you want to be aware of before you jump the gun and buy something that you think is going to make you, everyone has these dreams of escape to the chateau where, they're turning over money like crazy from, doing hotels and weddings, etc. So if that's your intention, that might not be the right property, but just ask your estate agent. If they're not sure, you can keep going further and speak to, a solicitor and someone like that. But that's what I would recommend.
The other thing worth bearing in mind, and two larger topics to talk about in this webinar in particular, but there is lots of information on the Your Overseas Home website about it. If you are intending to buy somewhere in France, or really anywhere in Europe, but I only know for France in particular, where you're planning on earning an income through renting, you will have to set up some certain tax registrations, and it can be a bit complicated. It's very doable. Lots of people do it, but it's just sort of thing to be aware that there's a level of bureaucracy that you'll need to sort of sign yourself up for if you're going to be running a rental gîte at the same time as either owning and living in a property there.
Yeah, definitely. I know that we've come really close to time. So I just very quickly, I don't think this is probably the best forum to answer this for you, Martin, but I know you've asked us a question about forced airship and things like that. What I would recommend would be either giving us a call on the number on the screen, dropping us an email, or if you're happy, I'll ask one of our colleagues to give you a call after this. It's probably best that we pop you in touch with a lawyer who can kind of help you wrap your head around those laws and what things you might be able to do. So we'll help you out with that side of things and give you some support there on understanding how that might impact you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We've really talked a lot this time, and I know it's kind of getting into the evening now. So thank you, everybody, for staying with us today. As we've mentioned, I think we've harped on about our on-demand section of the website far too much today. But if you would like to go back and watch any of our previous sessions, they're all listed on the on-demand section. So you can watch back some of the things we've spoken about today. You can also connect with our property consultants using the link that should be on the side of your screen now, and they'll be able to give you a free consultation to talk you through your plans and what the next best steps will be for yourself. No matter where you are in the journey, feel free to give us a call or request a call back. We can also connect you with any relevant partners for your plans. And if you are looking for something to do on Saturday, October 4th, you can join us for our biannual virtual event. We'll be there, and you can come visit our booth, but you can also speak to, I think we've got over 80 exhibitors now who will be present, who you can chat with about your plans, have a look around, see some properties, and get a feel for what your next steps might be. So feel free to kind of do that, and you can join us after that one again, when we'll be picking the series back up again, talking about how to finance an overseas property on October 30th, I believe, at 5 p.m. again. So feel free to tune in then, and we'll hopefully see you all then.
That's good. And as always, just if you've got any more questions, your buying journey is going to be specific to you. You're going to be looking at particular countries, particular areas. You're going to have particular needs where it comes to where you're taking your money from and sending it to. Just send us an email, pick up the phone and give us a ring. Like, we can answer all of this in one-on-one calls quite easily.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, everyone. Hopefully we'll see you all again, and have a lovely evening.
Speak to you all soon.